Oh, hey, what's up? It's your boy Rawk. Don't mind me. This time of year always just gets me feeling so sentimental. So I've been spending a lot of time reminiscing on the past, looking at photos of the good old days. Yeah, this photo was taken in the 90s. I was so young. -3 to -14 years old. I had so much potential. And I turned into this. But I also played Super Mario World, so it ain't all bad. When was your favourite time to be alive? You lost me at alive. The 1990s, an era that many people consider to be the peak of gaming, and that I consider to be the peak of me not yet being alive. But just because I wasn't there to experience something doesn't mean I don't know what it was like. Sure, I slept through that entire decade, but I own a Super Nintendo and have tried meth. As a part-time retro game collector, full-time pussy, I've experienced some of what the 90s had to offer. I think I have enough experience to pick a game of the year for each year in that decade. Now, I could have spent the past year playing even more games from the 90s to have even more of a clue of what I'm talking about, but instead, I chose to spend my time talking about monkey drums and getting evicted like a normal person!
Wait, those things happened in March. Didn't you still have time to play more 90s games?
And didn't you still have time to go f*** yourself? Let's see if I have what it takes to be 4 to 13 years older than I am. Let's delve into my game of the year throughout the 1990s. 1999 was the final year of the millennium. That's a big deal, and surely that meant the world was graced with some truly stellar video games. If you enjoy torture. 1999 was home to Pokemon Gold and Silver, in Japan at least, Donkey Kong 64, Pokemon Snap, Super Smash Bros., and of course, the very first Mario Party. This is a really solid lineup of games, and my favourite is a fight between the final three: Pokemon Snap, Super Smash Bros., and Mario Party. Pokemon Snap is by far the most unique Pokemon spin-off in my opinion, and took the world by surprise by being fun, when it had absolutely no right to be. How was a game about taking pictures of low polygonal rats one of the most enjoyable games in its series? I adore Pokemon Snap. It's a nice quick game to run through every now and then, and it has such a cozy vibe to it. If it went for some of the rest of the games that released this year, it would undoubtedly take the top spot. Super Smash Bros. Is one of the defining titles for the Nintendo 64, and while I do enjoy it, it's definitely more from a historical perspective, you know? Like, I can appreciate what it did for the world, but that doesn't really make us friends. Like Stalin. A lot of people hold that very same sentiment with Mario Party, but I couldn't disagree more. Mario Party is still one of my go-to multiplayer games to this very day. It's batshit, bullshit, dog shit. It's one of the most flawed multiplayer games out there, and yet the chaos, the rivalries, the trips to the hospital after tug of war, it's all some of the most fun the Nintendo 64 has to offer. I think I prefer Mario Party 2, and a lot of entries on different consoles, but as far as 1999 is concerned, the original takes the cake. 1998 was home to some gems, some certified bangers, some absolute good games. It had Wario Land 2, it had Wrecking Crew 98, it had the Game Boy camera, and it had the Donkey Kong Country TV show.
But that's not a game.
Well, that's not an opinion I give a shit about. Game of the Year this year, however, is a battle between two games: Banjo-Kazooie and The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. This is a really hard one for me. Let me walk you through my thought process here. When it comes down to it, I think I might have had more of an attachment to Ocarina of Time. I had a lot of issues with Banjo-Kazooie and found a lot of the game frustrating, but it has been years since I fully played through Banjo-Kazooie, and I'm way more likely to replay it compared to Ocarina of Time. While I did have my fair share of issues with it, I also absolutely loved it. But Ocarina of Time feels like the game I'm supposed to love more, you know? It's the video game. And while I think it's massively overpraised, I also found myself wildly endeared to it. But ultimately, I think I have to go with my gut. And my gut says... Banjo-Kazooie, just keep Rusty Bug at bay, Rusty f*** it away. 1997 was the year of GoldenEye 007, so you already know my opinion is going to piss you off. This does nothing for me. Like, sure, I get it. Huge cultural significance, set the standard for first-person shooters, all that fun stuff. But this is not something I find myself enjoying. So, what did I find myself enjoying? Well, Diddy Kong Racing, and the fact that the N64 released in my neck of the woods this year. So, can this be my game of the year? My pick for this year is between Mario Kart 64 and Yoshi's Story, and if you know anything about me, it should be pretty obvious why. Mario Kart 64 is no Hey You Pikachu, but it is one of the best Mario Kart games. It's so wacky and chaotic, and the gameplay, while objectively kind of dated, is still a blast. But Yoshi's Story is almost single-handedly the reason that I play games to begin with. This was my gateway drug, my introduction to the wider world of gaming. It was the first game I ever watched a Let's Play of, and it opened my eyes to the many wonders of this industry. It made me realize that there were more games out there than just the ones that featured Mario. They could also feature Mario's pets. Yoshi's Story is an incredibly fun game. It has its quirks, but at its core, it's a light-hearted romp through a storybook world of cute dinosaurs and lava monsters. And the gameplay on offer is incredibly tight and feels great. This is my pick for Game of the Year. It feels weird putting it above Mario Kart 64, but I have to be true to myself. And this is no Hey You Pikachu. 1996 was packed with good games. The final entry of the Donkey Kong Country trilogy, DKC3 Dixie's Triple Trouble, Tetris Attack, the first localization of the immensely underrated puzzle series Panel de Pon, Kirby Superstar, and Super Mario RPG, Legend of the Seven Stars. The first time our favourite plumber would have to wait his f***ing turn to stomp on a Goomba. But let's be real here. There was only one game that truly mattered this year. This year saw the release of the Nintendo 64 and its first batch of games, the most notable of which being Mario 64. Listen, I have a tumultuous relationship with this game. I absolutely stand by my opinion that this is the weakest of the 3D Mario games, and its flaws, in many ways, outweigh its positives. But as the years go by and I play it more and more, I start to fall in love with this game. Just that little bit more. To put it simply, this game is a nightmare to 100% complete. But if you're just running around, grabbing whatever stars your heart desires, messing around with Mario's moveset in these iconic areas, that's where the game shines the most. It's still flawed to hell and back, but playing the game this way opens the door for some really fun experiences. And that's why it's my game of the year for 1996. There are so many parts of it that, honestly, I kind of hate. But there's still room for me to have some easy, carefree joy in short bursts. This game can be immensely fun. And at the end of the day, that's all a game needs to be for me. 1995 saw the release of the Virtual Boy. I would have a Virtual Boy game as my game of the year, but after buying this thing in January 2023, I am the proud owner of exactly no Virtual Boy games. Which makes this a glorified paperweight that I spent £400 on. Why am I still surprised that I got evicted? So I have to turn to the Super Nintendo for my Game of the Year fix, and I have a couple of options to pick from. Earthbound is probably the game from this year that most would peg as their favourite, but I haven't played enough of it to truly understand how great it is. I've played the first hour or so and had a really good time with it, but I haven't played nearly enough to have an opinion that matters. Donkey Kong Country 2 is one of the best gaming sequels out there. An expertly crafted platformer with some of the nicest visuals, most intriguing design, and tightest gameplay I've ever known. I personally prefer the original, but my god, this game is exceptionally good. But it doesn't hold a candle to Super Mario World 2 Yoshi's Island. This is one of my favourite games ever. Which, by the way, do we have an official tally on how many games I've said that about? It's gotta be in the hundreds by now. Regardless, Yoshi's Island is platforming perfected. The gameplay is the most responsive, most fun I've ever experienced in a platformer, with some really unique concepts that are present throughout the entirety of the runtime, and make this game stand out compared to similar games in the genre. The visuals are gorgeous, and the soundtrack is an audible all-you-can-eat buffet. If I can play through a game that features this sound clip for a good portion of its runtime and still love it to no end, that's how you know it's truly something special. Yeah, this game runs pretty uncontested. For me, 1994 didn't really have a great deal going on. It had Wario Land, but I've never actually played that game. It had Super Metroid, one of the most praised games on the Super Nintendo, but much like Earthbound, while I've loved what I've played, I haven't played enough. So that just leaves Donkey Kong Country, a game that stands right next to Yoshi's Island on the list of hundreds of games that are my favourites of all time. Donkey Kong Country is just such a unique game. Its atmosphere and world building honestly wouldn't feel out of place in a modern, open world, cinematic kind of game, but it's present here, in a 2D platformer, on the Super Nintendo. This game is one of my biggest arguments in support of games being art. It presents this fascinating, luscious world to the player, and allows us to explore it through the lens of some intensely satisfying platforming. The gameplay is fundamentally simple, but executed to perfection. It is one of the best platformers in existence. A shining example of this genre doing what it does best, and my personal favourite game of 1994. 1993 was another light year for me and my tastes. Star Fox, a pretty enjoyable romp of stomach-churning 16-bit 3D and funky space furries, Kirby's Adventure, one of the most impressive NES games, and my personal pick, The Legend of Zelda: Link's Awakening. Now, full disclosure, I haven't played the original Game Boy version of this game all that much. I've dabbled with it on the Zelda Game & Watch, but for the most part, my time with this game was spent on the Nintendo Switch remake. Now, yes, this game is a massively modernized, beautiful remake of the beloved Game Boy classic, with quality of life upgrades aplenty and an art style that caused no controversy whatsoever. But at its core, it is still Link's Awakening, so it stands to reason that if I loved that version, I'd love the original. It's such a bizarre entry in the Zelda series. Much like Mario's outings on the handheld, it features a lot of elements that are so far removed from the established norms of the series. And yet, that's all the more reason that this game is so enjoyable. It has a certain surrealism about it that I find endlessly charming. And combined with the core gameplay, that leads to a thoroughly enjoyable and memorable adventure, and my game of the year for 1993. 1992 was home to a lot of heavy-hitting titles. The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past, Super Mario Kart, the very first Kirby game, Kirby's Dream Land, Mario Paint. Okay, maybe that doesn't belong in this conversation. But as much fun as I've had with all of those games at one point in time or another, none of them could compare to Super Mario Land 2. This is my third favourite classic 2D Mario game, so this shouldn't come as much of a surprise. But it's just so damn unique and fun. It's not a long or particularly complex game, but it's an enjoyable little title you can blast through in an hour or two. It won't change your life in any meaningful way, but it'll offer you a lot of fun, with its wacky level themes, bizarre enemies, and fun variety of power-ups. When it comes down to it, I value simplicity and fun above all else when it comes to games. And Super Mario Land 2 balanced those two things absolutely perfectly. 1991 saw the release of the Super Nintendo and its launch lineup, and among the few first-party games on offer, my absolute favourite of the bunch was Super Mario World. What? A Mario game that released this year was Rawk's favourite? Impossible! Rawk's favourite 2D Mario game was his game of the year? Implausible! There wasn't really much else the year had to offer, so the bar was actually pretty low for what Rawk would consider his favourite game of the year. Unbelievable! There isn't really much to be said here. Super Mario World is my favourite 2D Mario game, and honestly, one of the strongest entries in the wider series. It just offers so much that appeals to my exact tastes. For starters, Mario. There are only so many different ways that I can say this platformer has great gameplay, pretty visuals, a killer soundtrack, and a fun world and cast of characters. Yes, I fundamentally enjoy Super Mario World for the same reasons I enjoy every other platformer on this list. But there's just something about the way Super Mario World does it. I don't think I like it more than Yoshi's Island or Donkey Kong Country, but it is a stellar game, and one of the few 2D Marios that doesn't have an STI and has Yoshi. Last but certainly not least, 1990 saw the release of the Game Boy in Europe, Dr. Mario, and a new mainline Mario game. I wonder what Rawk's favourite game of the year might be. Yeah, this is pretty old news at this point, but my game of the year for 1990 is Super Mario Bros. 3. Take all of the praise I just had for Super Mario World and dial it down just a little bit, and you have Super Mario Bros. 3. The game introduced some really fun and unique power-ups, a particular highlight for me being the frog suit because stupid, pointless, funny. It also introduced some of my favourite Mario characters, the Koopalings. It's the strongest entry in the NES trilogy several times over, and is honestly probably my favourite NES game. I love this game so much that I sat through a movie that was made specifically to be an advertisement for this game 30 years after the game released and no longer needed advertising. And that is dedication. So, there we have it. My games of the year for all of the 1990s. Was it everything you hoped it would be? Look, I know. A lot of these games were Mario games, or at the very least, Mario adjacent. But what can I say? I'm a Mario fan. That's just where my tastes and preferences lie. I just have such a fondness for this series and its games. So, yeah, if there was a notable Mario title that released in any given year, there's a pretty good chance that it was my favourite of the bunch. But even if my picks were pretty predictable, it was still a blast to reflect on yet another decade of gaming and see which games took my interest the most, especially because I was reflecting on an era before my conception. And I mean, hey, most of these games may have been Mario games, but all of these games were Nintendo games, and that's simply because I'm just a Nintendo fan. And I don't ever see that changing.